I think that the Chinese were surprised by the magnitude of the Japan deal, by the magnitude and the terms of the European deal. So I think that they're never compliant, but I believe that they were in more of a mood for a wide-ranging discussion. The discussion centered on the two economies. We had a very in-depth report on them on the Chinese economy. We gave a very detailed report on the U.S. economy. We talked about the trade deals that we were doing with other countries. We expressed our concern about Chinese overcapacity globally and what that might mean for this year, for the next few years. We expressed our concern for their purchases of sanctioned Iranian oil, of which they buy about 90%. We also expressed our regret that we believe that they had sold Russia about $15 billion of dual-use technologies. But the overall tone of the meetings was very constructive, and I will pass it over to Ambassador Greer.
Thank you. We also reiterated the premise of the President's trade program and trade policy, which is to reduce U.S. deficits, increase manufacturing, and reshore our economy. We made sure that they understood that these are the goals of what the President's trying to do. And again, we expressed our satisfaction that many of our major trading partners have come along with this. President von der Leyen on Turnberry on Sunday, when I was there, she specifically mentioned that the U.S.-EU deal is about rebalancing and trying to rectify the giant EU surplus with us. And so we've been happy to be working so constructively with many of our partners. And we had that kind of a discussion with the Chinese as well. And of course, we were here, in the first purpose to confirm the implementation of what was agreed in London in terms of accelerating the flow of rare earth magnets from China to U.S. companies. And then we were able to discuss further how to make sure that the entire U.S. supply chain, including those that go through third countries, could be accelerated. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say on a personal level, we've developed great respect. Ambassador Greer knows several of their team from the first administration. And again, I think it was the level of momentum and the entire reordering that President Trump has done of the global trading system. So now here you have the two largest economies in negotiation. And as I've said before, and we reiterated to them, we don't want to decouple. We just need to de-risk with certain strategic industries, whether it's the rare earths, semiconductors, medicines, and we talked about what we could do together to get into balance within the relationships. Ambassador Greer has made the fantastic point that for decades the U.S. trading system sacrificed manufacturing for to be able to sell, whether it was ag or natural resources. And now under President Trump, as you've seen with the Japan deal, with the Europe deal, we are able to do both. We are able to reshore manufacturing and also do substantial purchase agreements of U.S. ag and energy.
We had Li Changgang speaking to reporters shortly after the end of the talks today, and he mentioned an extension of the pause. Can you give us some details on that, how long that's going to go on for, and how will it work? And if I could just throw in another one, what do you say to lawmakers in the United States and others who are concerned that concessions on export control on items like chips for AI will jeopardize U.S. national security interests?
Well, I'll take the national security question, and then Jameson could talk about the pause. Look, we are very diligent in terms of the national security. Things go through the interagency at the White House, whether it's Treasury, it's NSC, it's Commerce, it's DOD, so that there's nothing that's being exchanged for anything. I think you might be referring to the NVIDIA H20s, which are well down their technology chip stack.
Great. And I would say, I should also say the only export controls we talked about today were Chinese export controls on rare earths. Just U.S. export controls were not something we discussed. With respect to a potential pause, we're going to head back to Washington, D.C., and we're going to talk to the president about whether that's something that he wants to do. It's certainly something that's been under discussion, and so we'll brief the president on the outcome of this, and we'll see if there are any. We have further technical discussions that are happening right now as we speak among the teams, and so the president can make a final call on whether that's something that he wants to do.
Decision made today.
Not on our side. Well, I'll just repeat that China is the most imbalanced economy in modern times. And I think we are going, they're 30% of global manufacturing. They have a 2% current account surplus of global GDP, which we've never seen before, or probably not since the 1870s with the British Empire. And that's not sustainable. So the tariff levels will have quite a bit to do with that. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is that President Trump was very early on talking about the China problem. The U.S. experienced the China shock when China came into the WTO in the early 2000s, but Europe, a lot of the European business model, it was quite a business model, was predicated on cheap Russian energy, a depressed exchange rate because of the southern European countries dragging down the euro and then selling goods into China. And now that China has jujitsu'd the model, and under the cover of COVID, rather than increasing their consumer, they upped their export capacity, and they did it quite a bit up the value chain. So, we'll see over time. But my guess is that over time, that the other economies, developed economies, will start increasing their tariff barriers, and the global South, they just can't absorb all this Chinese production.
I would say also, when you ask about what tools can be used to deal with this, this is part of the reason why the president implemented his tariff program. Right now, if you look at the numbers, we're still tracking an annual trade deficit with China. But if you extrapolate it out from the numbers we have so far it looks like it's going to be at least $50 billion smaller this year. So that's some progress already. With respect to the Section 232, this came up during discussions. The Chinese asked us about it. What's the plan? What's the timing? We shared what information we could. You've heard President Trump talk about this publicly, which includes, discussion of, having a situation where you start with a lower tariff, but then you go to a higher tariff at some point to try to bring back manufacturing of pharmaceuticals or semiconductors. These are global actions. They don't target the Chinese. They don't target any particular country. They'll be applied globally. There aren't any exceptions or exemptions for particular countries.
And what's the biggest concession they've made?
That the Chinese have made? Well, I would say they blocked all of their rare earth magnets, and now we're getting them.
Cao Jie from Phoenix City, Hong Kong. I believe you discussed a range of topics with your China counterpart in these 2 days. But compared to Geneva and London, do you think is there any questions or issues are becoming tougher and toughest to negotiate? And as you mentioned that the U.S. is trying to convince China not to keep buying the oil, gas from Russia or Iran, will be the kind of new conditioner for the future round of the talk between U.S. and China. And also, I want to know, since U.S. government has pushed the tariff globally, to say push the tariff to a very high peak since 1930, as some newspapers said. But so both of you, do you think it will be concerned by the U.S. people about the potential inflation pressure and also the local economy. Do you believe will it be more or less slow the economy for the U.S.?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So I'll work backwards. I was a professor of economic history at Yale, and I can tell you it's my belief that as many people have a misunderstanding that the downturn in the 1930s was caused by an increase in tariffs. It wasn't. The stock market crashed in 1929. There was also a very large tax increase in the U.S. We just did the largest tax cut in history. The U.S. economy is starting to fire on all cylinders right now. We actually, in May, saw the biggest downturn in inflation in 4 years. So the U.S. economy is doing quite well. And I will tell you, rather than the talks getting more difficult, I actually think that they are getting more engaged. There was a in Geneva, very narrow issue with the magnets. In London, the talks went to a wider aperture. And here, we're able to discuss more and more things. This report that we gave each other on the economies, on the outlook. So I would say it's just the opposite. The purpose of meeting frequently is to have personal relationships, have understandings, and show respect and mutual cooperation. I think Jameson, Ambassador Greer, has been dealing with the Chinese much longer than I have.
Yes, I have. No other comments, though.
Great. Hi, thanks. Secretary, question about Russian oil. As you know, the president has threatened possible tariffs on countries that continue to buy Russian oil 100%. China is the largest purchaser of that commodity. What was your message to the Chinese about Russian oil? Did you tell them that they're on notice, they need to start to pull back?
Well, we described, it's not just the president, what is making its way through the U.S. Senate, and hard to imagine anything could get 80 or 90 bipartisan votes in the U.S. Senate, is a bill that will give the president discretion to apply secondary tariffs on sanctioned Russian oil from, I believe it's from 0 to 500%. I believe he's used 100%. And we've heard from several of our European counterparts, NATO allies, even Canada. Well, Canada is in NATO, that they will be following on that. So we would expect most of the Western alliance that has been supporting Ukraine to follow on that. So I think anyone who buys sanctioned Russian oil should be ready for this.
What was their response to that warning?
The Chinese take their sovereignty very seriously. We don't want to impede on their sovereignty, so they'd like to pay 100% tariff.